whole idea of a renewal of cultural richness. Really amazing message. I'll reference it a little bit more in a moment, but just really beautiful, challenging, inspiring message. And we're going to sort of continue that theme this week and next. There's another deep dive, as Andrew said, next week after the service. So don't miss that. I'd really highly recommend coming to that discussion after the service. We had a really wonderful time last week, challenging, people really engaging, and my takeaway was just how much we love this community, and that's a beautiful thing. So do come along next week if you're able to stay behind. So culture is a fascinating thing, right? It's a really fascinating thing. Just a quick example. Literally just now, I was sat next to my son Oliver, who was playing guitar, and when the 90% went up for our giving, he was like, yes, 90%, because that's a pretty good grade, right? Whereas we're all saying, well, we need to get up to 100. So we need to get up to 100. But it's interesting how we all perceive things differently. So as you know, I'm not from America, right? I'm not from this culture. And so, I've had to learn and adapt in lots of different ways. And, even something as simple as language, which, you think we speak the same language. Well, you maintain that it's the same language, but, we're beg to differ. But, it's the same language, but language can mean different things. It's the same language, but in a different context and a different culture means different things. And I was going to use a ton of examples of that. Most of them are slightly obscene. So I thought they might be a bit too risque, where I've said something that actually means something completely different in the American culture, and could even be offensive. So in the spirit of cultural sensitivity, I tried a few of those out on people to say, do you think I could say this at church? And most of them were, no, you can't say that. Do not say that. So I'm going to just go with something a little milder, which I've shared here before, and I got away with it that time. So I'll give you an example. So talking about giving, this was back in 2011, so a long time ago. We were at a similar kind of situation in our giving, a little bit behind, and that's part of our church culture, right? We don't pass the plate around. We're sort of low pressure about giving, and that means we end up getting behind usually until we talk about it again and remind everybody and remind ourselves, and then we pick up. But one day we were behind, one Sunday, and I said at the end of the service, I was sort of explaining it all, and I said, you know what, we just need to bring in a shed load of money. All right. So now what I said was shed load, which it turns out is more of an English expression. Whereas the American expression that was heard also began with SH and it ended in load, but people thought I said something else. So it was at the end of the service, it just went dead quiet. And I thought, oh no, I pushed it too much on the giving. I just got a bit too, over the top. Nobody said anything to me, right? No, it was just nobody came up apart from one person and they came up because their parents were there. And I used to get that, especially back then, that people would come up to me and say, hey, my parents from out of town are visiting next week. Are you going to talk about anything weird? They would always sort of ask me that because, some of you here may have asked me that sometime. And I would say, well, this is what I'm going to be talking about if I knew what I was going to be talking about a week ahead. Anyway, so they came up and explained to me. And then I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize. So the next week I had to get up there and say, look, this is a shed. This is a shed. And this is a shed load of money. Right? Now, actually, even that's inaccurate because I think I looked the term up. I thought, where does that actually come from? Because I always thought it was like, a shed load is a big load. Well, it's more of a shed, as in you've lost the load of a truck or a lorry, as we would say in England, right? So that's apparently where it comes from. So I was wrong as well. But either way, I got misunderstood because of cultural context, right? Purely because of the cultural context. So even with language. Now, it also affects, there are other things we had to sort of get used to here because there's so many other aspects to culture, right? That culture is this weird thing that we're not aware of. Because it's like the saying, a fish doesn't know it's wet, right? We're all swimming in our normal culture, making all these assumptions about all kinds of things, even language. But also, there's a load of other things like So like time, the concept of time, which you would think was a constant. Um, Example in case. So when I first moved to the US, actually, we lived in Cincinnati, Ohio originally. So this was back in the mid 90s. So I'm fresh out of England. I'd lived in Latin America for a little bit, and there's a very different concept of time there. So here I come into the US, and I was chatting with this guy, and he said, "Hey, let's do breakfast." And in England, we don't really do breakfast. Like breakfast is something you have when you're rushing out the door to get somewhere. You know, it's like there's not. We don't have. Well, we do now, but back then we didn't have restaurants that serve breakfast. Nobody's up that early. You know, so I said, sure, let's do breakfast. Trying to be culturally appropriate, and he said, okay, 5:30. So I'm thinking 5:30 p.m. is way too late for breakfast, right? You know, but he wanted to meet 5:30 a.m. So you just wouldn't do that, right, in the UK. So I had to sort of adjust. Okay, you know, life gets going pretty early here. At the other end of the spectrum, people would invite you for dinner. And what we found was, like in the UK, normally if you get invited for dinner, it's to somebody's house. That's generally what it means, because there's not so many restaurants. Again, back there, we've become very Americanized in many ways over time, because of this. The American culture is a very forceful culture. So, but you'd go around to somebody's house. If we did get invited around to somebody's house here, it would be come round for dinner from 6 till 8. So there was an end point, you know. So the way you'd read that coming from the UK is, so you don't think this is going to go very well, right? Because you need an out, you need an end point to this invitation. Whereas you would just invite somebody over with a start time. You wouldn't talk about an ending time. Now, obviously, in America, you need an ending point because you need to get up for 5:30 breakfast the following day, right? I get that now. Totally get that now. But the end point is negotiated in a different way in England, right? Because, you know, if it's going on too long, you just get up and start filling the dishwasher, and that's a cue. The evening's over. Or my wife came up with this genius idea, because it's perfect, because it's got a religious and spiritual connotation to it, which is, can we pray for you before you leave? You know, and that's so. What are you going to say? No. So, you know, so we all have these little cultural aspects of our lives that we take for granted, and we're unaware of them. And that's something that we're exploring together as a community, as a church community. So I want to just today look back a little bit briefly on what Nikki talked about last week. Just reference a few things. I can't do justice to that. I really encourage you to listen to that online. You can go to our website and listen or watch that message. Really encourage you to do that. But let's just look at a couple of, or three of the scriptures that Nikki referenced. The first one was related to this whole issue of Jesus' dream for humanity, not just for the church, but I think for the whole of humanity, that we would be one, that humanity would be healed and whole. My prayer, this is Jesus praying, my prayer is not for them alone. I pray also for those who will believe in me through their message, that all of them may be one, Father, just as you are in me and I am in you. May they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. I have given them the glory that you gave me, that they may be one as we are one, I and them and you and me, so that they may be brought to complete unity. Then the world will know that you sent me and have loved them even as you have loved me. And Nikki made the point that this is the message, right? We are the message. This unity is something that speaks far louder than our words could possibly speak. And that's a beautiful image. I mean, it's incredibly challenging when you look at the world today. The thought of that becoming a reality seems so far off. But this is Jesus' dream. This is what Jesus is calling us to. And that unity, though, Nikki made the point, that unity is not based on uniformity or conformity. It's based on cultural richness. So after this is a image of the future that we have in the Bible, in the book that appears at the end of the Christian scriptures, a book called Revelation. Here's an image of the future. After this, I looked, and there before me was a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation. The Greek word there is ethnos, from which we get ethnic group, tribe, people, and language, standing before the throne and the Lamb. So there's this beauty of unity in diversity, where all cultures are expressed and not having to conform to one overarching culture or any one of those cultures, but it's expressed beautifully as in this very human, beautiful way, because humanity in Jesus's mind is beautiful. Humanity in the divine perspective is beautiful. So we want the full expression of humanity. So this is not about conformity, it's about cultural richness. All cultures in our community belonging in equitable ways. But that's only possible, Nikki went on to point out, that's only possible if all of us are willing to humbly defer to one another. Philippians 2, therefore, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any common sharing in the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and of one mind. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Well, I think we're not ambitious, we're not proud, we're not conceited, but rather in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interest, but each of you looking to the interest of others. So there's this mutual deferment. It's only possible if we live like that, with that perspective, rather than kind of camping down on, no, these are non-negotiables. I'm not going to give up on this issue. That we would be deferring and listening to one another and thinking about what's going to benefit the other. Again, really encourage you to listen to that message. For me, it was inspiring and challenging, but also deeply moving. I won't go into too many details of that, but it's kind of personal. But the reason why I felt so moved was because this is what's at the heart of our vision as a community. We have this really challenging vision, and it just felt like this resonated so deeply with who we want to be as a community, the vision, the dream that we have, because Jesus has a dream and we have a dream. You know, if you read our vision statement, this is just the very first part of it. It's a fairly long vision statement. We'll look at some of the other aspects from it later on in a moment. Okay, sorry. Can you hear me okay? Oh, whoa, yes. Is that better? Can you hear me better now? Okay, I'm just adjust that a bit. This is from the beginning of our vision statement. So we have a dream too. So imagine a community that dares to dream of heaven on earth. Okay, that dares to dream of the divine reality in this reality, our flesh and blood, our geography, our earth, our humanity. A diverse community where everyone is welcomed and respected and their journey cherished. A community where everyone belongs and looks out for the concerns of others, so no one feels alone. So with that beginning of our statement, we're saying everyone looks out for the concerns of others, so no one feels alone. It's a community where everyone belongs. So there's equitable belonging. Nobody has to leave their culture at the door in order to belong to this community, to belong to our vision, to our values, our way of following Jesus. We have a unique vision and values as a community, right? We're not saying that's better than anybody else's. It's just who we are, who we want to be. Everybody can participate in that without leaving our culture or having to suppress our culture in any kind of way. That's our belief. That's our dream, that is possible. Now, there's a couple of other statements we make that aren't really our vision statement. They're not part of our vision statement, but there are attempts to summarize who we are, especially when we're in outward-facing situations, like when we're at Burtonsville Day, for instance, or in some of our flyers where we're just trying to communicate in a nutshell who we are. Because our vision statement's a little bit longer, right? So let's look at a couple of these statements. See, it doesn't look that short, actually, when you look at it on the screen, does it? I'm a little bit long-winded, if you worked out. Anyway, Cedar Ridge is a community of hope and transformation. Hope that God has not given up on any of us, no matter how much we may be struggling right now. Hope that God has not given up on our world, no matter how violent and unjust it may seem. And hope that transformation is possible, that love is greater than fear, and a new world of peace, justice, and kindness is within reach. That's the kingdom of God is at hand. So we have great hope that kind of cultural richness is possible. We have great hope that we can do this, that transformation is possible because of love, because nothing but love, actually. That love that drives our sort of deferring to one another and humbly welcoming and including and listening and responding to the sort of life that Jesus was talking about. Another statement we make is we are a diverse, open and affirming community, sharing God's love with everyone and working to make the world a better place for all. We invite you to join us on our journey to become more just and loving people who are committed to being the change we long to see in the world. So this is an invitation to the whole world, or at least Burtonsville, or the places we work, or the places we live. You know, it's an invitation to the whole world. But more importantly than that, I think, we're saying, join us in being the change we want to see. In other words, we're not actually communicating, you need a change, you need a change, you need a change. We're saying, we want to be the change. And that's just so much harder, right? A vision's inspiring. A vision is captivating. Actually living it out is sort of done in the hard work of the daily grind. It's done in the hard work of being in relationship with one another when we're different, or we think differently, or we have cultural context that makes when we say shed load sound like somebody's being offensive, right? So it's a challenge. And in fact, again, something Nikki also said last week was, I want to get our credibility back, right? Now, I think when Nikki said that, she's not just saying, you know, Cedar Ridge's credibility, but I think, correct me if I'm wrong, it's the followers of Jesus around the world, right? It's like, do we have any credibility if we can't live out what we're talking about? I would say no. Because, you know, and perhaps, and maybe I'm pushing this a little bit here, but perhaps one of the reasons why the Christian religion as a whole has so frequently defaulted to, it's all about what happens after you die. Is it heaven or is it hell? If you are a good person, or actually maybe in some religious constructs, it doesn't really matter whether you're good or bad. It's, did you believe the right thing? Did you pray the right prayer? And then when you're dead, you go to heaven. And nobody can prove that, right? Or disprove it, I guess. So it's just sort of out there. And there's no real accountability for it, or there's no way you can see if it's creditable or not. Perhaps the reason we've defaulted to that kind of, that's the currency of religion, is because we failed at so often at living this dream out on earth. Right? When Jesus says, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven, that's such a hard reality to live out. And I don't say that to judge anybody. If I'm judging anyone, it's me, right? I'm speaking out of personal experience of it being so much harder to live that way than to believe anything you want, including our vision and our values. So there's this credibility issue that's so important for us, and that we also take really seriously. And again, Jesus here, I think, is our model. So do you remember we went through the Sermon on the Mount? It was for Lent, wasn't it? It feels like ages ago now. It was for Lent. We went through this sermon, or this gathered teaching of Jesus that's presented to us in Matthew chapter 5 through 7. And it's just incredibly challenging teaching. And at the end of it, it says this. When Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowd were amazed at his teaching, because he taught as one who had authority and not as their teachers of the law. And you have to ask yourself, like, okay, so why? What's the difference? Why has Jesus got authority? There was something, I can only imagine it was Jesus's integrity. He's living what he's talking about in a way that it's very easy to be religious and you're just spouting cliches or platitudes or beliefs, rather than living it out in the way that Jesus did. Actually, the Message, a very modern translation, puts it like, they sort of allude to this. They put it like this. When Jesus concluded his address, the crowd burst into applause. I like that. They had never, I don't know whether that happened, because I think they'll be more like, oh boy, this is really challenging. But they had never heard teaching like this. It was apparent that he was living everything he was saying. Quite a contrast to their religion teachers. This was the best teaching they'd ever heard. It's the best teaching because it's so creditable, it's so credible, it's so real. Jesus is being the change he wants to see in the world. And then, of course, that's exactly what Paul is saying about Jesus. So we just read earlier, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. Okay, so we just heard that. He goes on to say why, and perhaps even how. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man. He humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. So this is a deeply theological, philosophical passage, but there's a practical side to it, which is, look, that's how Jesus lived. Paul never met Jesus, so he's sort of drawing all kinds of theological conclusions from the way that Jesus lived. He's obviously heard about how Jesus lived. And it's this modeling to us what letting go of privilege, letting go of power, letting go of control is all about, if we want to live that kind of life that Jesus is dreaming of, this community that's one, where there's cultural richness and equitable belonging. So let's just look at a few aspects of the reality of this. So I want to just take a minute to see how, okay, this was really challenging for the church. In those early days, they really struggled with this as well. And then look at our vision and our values and how we could be a community like that, how our vision and values can hold us together in this really challenging task. So let's look at the first verse of Acts chapter 6. We get a really interesting story here. We're just going to read the first verse about it. But a lot of people were now becoming followers of the Lord. So this is after Jesus, and so his followers are gathering other followers. But some of the ones who spoke Greek started complaining about the ones who spoke Aramaic. They complained that the Greek-speaking widows were not given their share when the food supplies were handed out each day. So what you have here, and this is sort of the early days when the church was still in Jerusalem, the church is still Jewish. It doesn't seem like Jesus came to start another religion. Jesus was somebody renewing the present day religion with a much more global, inclusive perspective in mind. So it's essentially Christianity is a sect of Judaism at this point, and it's drawing people who are both let's call them Hebraic Jews. So these would be speaking the sort of how the Hebrew language evolved into Aramaic, like Jesus, and then Hellenistic or Greek Jews who would have been either Gentile people converted to Judaism or ethnically Jewish people who were more influenced by the Hellenistic culture of the day. So you have cultural differences. And there seems to be a problem where there's some favoritism to one, to probably the dominant culture. And you can read that in the book of Acts, what happens as a result of all that. But it seems like it was true because they actually do something about it. They don't. The response of the leadership is not, no, that's not true. Come on, that's not real. They say, okay, yeah, there's a problem. There really is. So we need to make some adjustments here. So the church was struggling with this. We also have in Galatians a whole letter from Paul about this kind of thing, because the church in Galatia was having a real problem with a similar kind of issue. There are Jewish people in the church. There are also Gentile people in the church who are from a pagan background, and the Jewish contingent are trying to impose Jewish culture on the Gentiles. It's like they're saying, well, this whole thing grew up in a Jewish context. Jesus's earliest disciples, the apostles, continued worshiping in the temple in Jerusalem, right? So, they're saying, so that's what it's about. And then along comes some Gentile people, and they don't have all of that. That's not part of their culture. And Paul is having to say, It's not about the culture here. The culture's a wonderful thing, a beautiful thing, but there's something more than that that's going to unify us. And we need to respect one another. So he makes this statement: there is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor is there male or female, but all are one in Christ Jesus. So what we got to be careful about here is that Paul is clearly not saying culture goes away, or saying culture is a bad thing, or subsume all cultures into one megaculture or one metaculture, but rather all these are of value. And of course, today we would have, I don't think that's an exhaustive list, right? We would have many other categories. And so as we think about our own vision and values of who we are, living those out and joining in with our vision and our values is for everybody, with no exception, right? Whether you're white, black, whether you're male, female, or non-binary, whether you're gay, straight, trans, queer, all people is all people. That everybody and anybody can embrace our vision and values. Now, obviously, also, so in other words, what I'm saying here is there's no one culture that's going to predominate in that respect. Also, anybody, black, white, male, female, non-binary, gay, straight, trans, queer, all people can reject our vision and values. And they frequently do, right? We have people coming who are looking for a new church, and they come along to Cedar Ridge in 7 minutes, and it's pretty clear that, they may not even come to Cedar Ridge minutes. It's just we're not their cup of tea for all sorts of reasons. And through our history, in my time here, plenty of people have decided that this isn't the community for them because they're not aligned with the vision and values, and that's okay. That's got to be okay. We're not here to judge people, but we're not going to compromise our vision and values. We're just going to make it. I think, need to have to think through seriously if we're not as equitable in belonging as perhaps we could be or would want to be. Then we have to question to what degree are we really living our vision and values, because that's what's in our vision and values. So our vision and values, by the way, this is another way of looking at, I meant to mention this, sorry, but Paul, it's not important. Okay, so on to our vision and values, right? So here are our values. I'm not going to go through all of them. You'll be glad to know, but at the heart of them all is love. That's our presiding value, if you like. We're a community of hope. We value humility. That's the sort of the deference issue. We value journey. You see many of these things actually up on our banners. Process. We're on a journey together, and that's okay. We're not there yet, right? So any challenge to where we're at is not a condemnation. It's saying, hey, we've got further to go. Isn't that great? We value justice, diversity, hope, humility, journey, justice. That's all of them. Okay, so there's a question in the discussion questions this week that gets at those, right? Each one of them to say, okay, what is this value saying about our desire for cultural richness? Okay, so they're our values. Now, I want to show a couple of models that we've shared before. One of them actually is, we talk about it when we do the journey. That's a little discussion group. If people are thinking about joining our church, we talk about this at the journey. But a couple of models. One is from set theory. We sort of talked about this, once we formed this vision, so that was about 20 years ago, and then not long after that, we started trying to find language to explain our vision, so we could have some understanding of it. So we talk about set theory. Sociology, mathematics use. That's where we've drawn. Those are disciplines we've drawn this theory from. But it's not that we're trying to be a certain kind of set. It's just we're trying to be our vision and values, right? But this is a metaphor that maybe helps us a little bit. So we talk about bounded sets and centered sets. So a bounded set is a set. It's a way of defining a group of individuals or numbers, or depends what theory you're talking, discipline you're coming from. It's a way of defining a group based on a very firm boundary. So most religious communities are like this. So it's based on your inclusion in that community is based on a set of criteria. Often it's beliefs, it might be practices, and it's like it's very clear who's in and out. And there are, when you're in that community, you could be moving in all kinds of different directions within it, but as long as you don't cross back out of that boundary, right? And I'm moving through this quickly, but many of us probably have experienced being in communities like that. I'm fortunate enough to get to talk to a lot of people who are in our community, and there are many stories of people who have experienced that in churches. We are trying to be, or that we would say, our vision of values is more about being a centered set where we don't impose a boundary. So probably 19 years ago, we'd stopped using a doctrinal statement, right? So you don't have to believe, you're not included in this community based on what you believe, a set of doctrines. This is just one example, but rather on where are you headed? So we have a very porous boundary, but we try to have a very firm center, which is our vision and our values. It's, if you like, following Jesus in the way that we define it, right? That, again, we're not saying we've got it all right. That's sort of itself is a work in progress. We're not saying everybody else is wrong. It's just, you got to pick a lane, right? So, we have our vision and our values, and we treasure that. We're not flippant about it. We really take it seriously. And so really what brings us into what we have in common in a community like this is not all having the same beliefs, but are we headed towards Jesus? Are we following Jesus in our own unique way? We've all come from different backgrounds, different journeys. If we canvassed everybody in the room right now and said, give me a definition of Jesus, it would be probably all over the map. And I think that's a good thing. But we're saying we want to follow Jesus, and we want to embody our vision and values. So that's what holds us together, right? That's what keeps us. It's not cultural conformity. It's not all of us believing the same thing. It's not all of us using the same language. It's not all of us conforming to any overarching mega culture. It's saying, no, following Jesus in our unique way, in our unique cultural ways as well. Can we be a community like that? Here's another model I wanted to share that I've used before as well. And on the screen right now, we have a murmuration. This is called a murmuration. So these are starlings. This is actually from the Netherlands. So you get really great, there's a part of the UK where you can see this kind of display of birds. It's often on when the land's really flat, as it is in the Netherlands. So just, I think you can all see that. It's just, we haven't got any sound on, but it's just like a swarm of birds. So bees do this, obviously, fish do it. It's a flocking phenomenon, which is just beautiful, where you have all these individuals that have, we have a kind of a super organism here, right? It's like bees, where all these individuals are working together in this beautiful coordinated way that also feels a little chaotic. It's not like uniform. It's not controlled. And so again, I've shown this. I think actually my first. I thought this is. I'm going to show you something here which is really high tech. I thought was really high tech, but then I realized first time I showed this was 20 years ago, so it's probably really outdated now. But anyway, I just haven't kept up with technology. But maybe we could put this one on, Greg. So what we have here is a simulation of swarming, or a simulation of flocking. So these things on the screen, there's little particles on the screen that are called boids. And at the bottom of the screen, we have different phenomena or different controls. So we can control each one of these boids, each one of these units, because flocking is based on three simple dynamics, right? The first one is fly towards the center of the group. Okay, so that's coherence at the bottom there. So fly towards the center of the group. That we might think of that as community, just be in community, or defer to one another. All right. The other control there is separation, which sounds really bad. We don't like, that's kind of a negative term, but what it means is don't bump into one another. Okay, so fly towards the center, but don't bump into one another. We could think about that as perhaps maintain your individuality, or if we think about these voids as cultures, not individual people, respect and maintain culture. All right. So, and then the third one is alignment, which we could maybe, I think we get what that means for these voids, these particles, but we might think of that as common purpose, right? Sharing a common purpose together. So, Greg, let's move those up to 50%. We're not going to go up to 100%. So they've got no control on them at the moment, but we're going to just see what happens if we give them 50% of the level of alignment. So that's what happens, right? So all they're doing is follow 3 simple instructions: fly to the center, don't bump into each other, and be aligned. Share a purpose. So you can see they're moving pretty quickly there, but you can see that's all it took for them to flock, for them to work together. So now there's another thing up there called visual range. So that's based on how far you can see, obviously, but in nature that might not be actual sight, eyesight. It could be feeling, it could be sound. Also, nature communicates in all kinds of different ways. But if we take out visual range, if we knock that down to 0, so we could have all those values. His story working too well. Go on, Greg. There we go. So if you take vision out, so if they can't actually see, we get back to a bit more chaos, right? So vision is important as well. Sort of knowing where we're going, having a vision, having values is really important. Okay, we can go back to, let's put the visual range back in. Great. So there we are with this nice sort of flock. It goes a bit random for a while again, but then it's gradually catching up, and we're back as a community again. What happens if we take separation down to 0, right? So in other words, what happens if we stop valuing culture? If we become a monoculture, right? That's what happens. And if we put the tracer on here, Greg, so this is tracing what's the wake of a community like that? What's the impact of a community like that in society? It kind of looks like a snake, which in biblical imagery isn't a positive thing, right? If you look at Book of Genesis, but it's minimal impact. It's so one-dimensional, so one-dimensional. Now, what if we let's take the trace off again, Greg, and then let's go back to just 50% separation. See a little explosion there, and then we're back to a fuller expression. Let's put the trace on that. What's the wake of a community like this? That just looks more beautiful, doesn't it? It's more complex, but it's like, you think of how complex society is, what our impact in a world that we long to see change will be based on this model, so much more beautiful, so much more impactful, so much broader and complex and creative, if we can be that kind of flock, right? If we can be that kind of flock. So we can take that off, Greg. We'll wrap up here. So actually the music team can come back up if all right. But I just want to finish off with a couple more statements from our vision, because when I look at that simulation, I may be the only one in the room who thinks that's beautiful, that ending thing. But I also realize it's so challenging, right? So challenging. And that's why I think we get at that in our vision. Then we read the first paragraph from our vision at the beginning, but here's what our vision says in the following paragraph. Imagine a community of peace and safety where it's possible to shelter from the frenzied pace of life in order to slow down and explore the mystery and meaning of our existence, where we can take time to address the roots of our anxieties and pain, a place of hope where we can find help and healing and the power to change, no matter how desperate our situation. I think it's obvious. We should be ready when we look at the scriptural context where it was really hard to do this. Like we looked at a couple of examples of that. So Jesus has a dream, but Jesus knows it's really difficult. I think that's why Jesus is praying, God help them, which is essentially what Jesus is saying. That for us to be that kind of a community is going to bring up all kinds of anxieties and tensions and difficulties. It's the same kind of tension that I felt, or not the same, but similar tension to that I felt when I first moved to the States. Like this was sort of early 90s, and I was barely on the internet then. I didn't know how to post a letter. I remember just wanting to go and mail a letter back to the UK, and I didn't know how to do that. How do you navigate post offices and that kind of thing? It's just different in the UK. So, and I had all kinds of stress about that. It's just difficult. That's a tiny example, but for us to come together and truly embrace one another with equitable belonging, there's bound to be some tensions. I mean, one of those tensions will be, one of those challenges will be being willing to show up in a context where your culture might not feel like it's represented very strongly. To help us move forward and become a community of cultural richness, a community of equitable belonging, that takes huge risk and courage. And we must never underestimate that. Likewise, some of the anxiety might be on the part of we've kind of grown comfortable with who we are, right? We've grown comfortable as a community. Maybe we've found real solace, and we've come from some more exclusive kind of context that for us, maybe based on our beliefs, like our evolving beliefs weren't tolerated or whatever. We've come and found this community, and we don't want to lose anything, right? And we might have fear about that. And that's okay, but our vision is saying we need to get in touch with the roots of our anxieties and pain. Where does that come from? Where does that come from? And that's part of our journey too, right? So as we come now to communion, we're going to eat and drink. We have gluten-free crackers and fruit juice here at the front and in the middle. We're actually celebrating, I think, that vision of Jesus. That's why we call it communion. It's a communion with the presence of Christ in the here and now, and it's a communion with one another. We're sort of saying, Jesus, crazy as it sounds, we believe you when you say that kind of oneness is possible. And we're not going to give up on it. We're not going to give up. And we understand that it's going to be challenging and hard and difficult, but it's also going to be beautiful, and we're going to do it together. We're going to help one another and support one another. It's something we have to do together. There's no one culture that's going to sort it all out, right? We are going to do it together. So it's a beautiful thing. And we're sort of saying to Jesus, yes, we agree. We agree with that dream. We agree with the beauty of it. And it's totally worth living for. It's our dream of heaven on earth. And we dare to dream it. We dare to dream it. So let's just take a moment just to quieten our hearts before we eat and drink together. And let's just lean into God's presence. Because Jesus is here in some crazy way that we don't really understand, but we kind of feel it. Jesus is here. The Spirit of the Christ, the Spirit of the risen Christ that heals and transforms, that never condemns, that challenges and says, we can do this. Let's lean into that presence. And as we take communion, as we go around the room to light candles or write out prayers at the different stations around the room, let's say yes to the dream of Jesus. Come, Holy Spirit. So when you're ready, please come forward and take communion.